The key to competing for a championship in the NBA not only comes down to having good enough players to play at an elite level, but it actually, more often than not, comes down to the decisions made by the front offices of the teams. The guys in charge of these organizations need a well thought out, strong plan both for the short term and for the long term in order to consistently compete at the highest level, and we see examples of this with some of the most recent champions. Teams like the Golden State Warriors, Toronto Raptors, San Antonio Spurs, and Miami Heat are notoriously some of the most well-run teams in the league and are some of the most recent champions. So this theory fits, and alternatively, the teams we tend to see at the bottom of the standings are more often than not the teams with front offices making poor decision after poor decision. In the offseason, I made a video on this topic but about the Detroit Pistons, and I must admit that I was wrong about the Pistons and their direction, because they've done some pretty good things for a rebuilding team this year, so I've got to apologize. Instead, this brings us to the topic of today's video, where we'll be talking about why the Minnesota Timberwolves, not the Pistons, are the most directionless team in the NBA right now. The Timberwolves have had arguably more bad luck than anyone recently, especially over the last few seasons, and now they're left in a spot where getting out of the basement is going to take a lot of work. Before we get started though, it turns out about 65% of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so please, if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I would also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. As I just said, I do owe the Pistons an apology. In the preseason, I was a bit skeptical about some of their signings, along with the fact that they still had Blake Griffin and Derrick Rose in key roles, but this year they moved both of those players in trades, or buying them out, and they have fully shifted towards the development of their young players. And now with that in mind, they can actually say they have a real plan. The Timberwolves, however, are a completely different story. Back in 2015, when the Timberwolves drafted Karl-Anthony Towns first overall, things were actually looking up. When you get a number one pick in a draft with a clear prize at the top like Towns was, it's something that can really kickstart an organization, and Towns has lived up every bit to the hype he had coming out of college and more. Right away, he won Rookie of the Year, then in year 2 he was one of the most productive big men in the league, putting up about 25 points and 12 rebounds per game. When you have a young player with legitimately elite potential like that on your team, the aim should be to build a strong enough supporting cast around him so that they can both begin to compete in the short term while continuing to grow in the long term. At this same point, the team also had emerging young star Zach LaVine and an inconsistent yet pretty productive Andrew Wiggins on the team, so they had a decision to make. They could allow this trio to continue to blossom through the years as they were all still very young at the time, or they could float one of them out in a trade as trade bait to go after a big splash of a move to contend in the short term, and unfortunately, this is where the beginning of their downfall begins. Of the three, they obviously weren't going to give up Towns, and they ended up choosing Zach LaVine to be the youngster that they shipped out in a big trade that landed them Jimmy Butler. Now, we all know Jimmy Butler is the ultimate competitor that not only holds himself to an incredibly high standard, but he also holds those around him to that same standard as well. And it was the driving force behind why the Miami Heat made the finals last year. But with that being said, if that energy isn't reciprocated, things can get messy quickly. The Timberwolves in 2018 with Jimmy Butler did have their best season in the Karl-Anthony Towns era to this point, but that's not exactly saying much. They sneaked into the playoffs as an 8 seed in the West on the final day of the season, only to lose in 5 games to the Rockets in the first round of the playoffs. And after that, Jimmy began to make it abundantly clear that he was not happy on the team anymore, as we all know the infamous story of him beating the starters with the bench and trash-talking the entire time while in preseason. To ease the tensions, they traded Jimmy Butler to Philadelphia early on in 2019 in exchange for Robert Covington and Dario Saric, hoping Covington could step in and fill the defensive hole left behind by Butler, but it just simply was not enough. In 2019, the Wolves finished 11th place in the Western Conference, in 2020 the Wolves finished 14th place in the West, and now this year, the Wolves have the worst record in the NBA. We're now 6 years into the Karl-Anthony Towns era in Minnesota, and the team has one playoff appearance to show for it 3 years ago. Now, after Butler left, it's not like they gave up trying to make big swings either. However, as has been a trend with them regarding their luck, the next move I'm about to discuss backfired pretty badly as well. Last season, the Wolves knew that they had to get off of Andrew Wiggins' contract because he just wasn't worth the max deal that they gave him. So they went out and traded him to Golden State in return for D'Angelo Russell, who not only had previously been an all-star, but he was also a good friend of Karl-Anthony Towns, so the match seemed to be made in heaven. But where the bad luck I mentioned earlier comes in more than ever with this pairing is because injuries to both Towns and Russell have been brutal over the last year and a half. The worst part is that their injuries haven't ever really been at the same time, and because of that, the overlap has never been there either, and Karl-Anthony Towns and D'Angelo Russell have only played 6 games together so far. Yes, you heard that correctly, the team's 2 best players have only played 6 games together after spending a little less than half a season together last year and all of this season together so far. It's no wonder the team has the worst record in the league this year, but at the same time, there's no real way to know if this partnership, combined with the core of players around them, is even enough to make much more real noise in the loaded Western Conference. Obviously, without question, having the entire team healthy would help, but right now they're essentially locked into the team that they now have money-wise, and it's just not very good. Stars like Towns can only be content being at the bottom of the standings for so long before they start to grow irritated and might even request a trade, and their payroll is already over the salary cap not only this year, but next year and the year after that as well. That means the core of Karl Towns, D'Angelo Russell, Malik Beasley, and Anthony Edwards are locked in with only real means of improvement available to them being through the draft and trades. Those are 2 avenues that could definitely be good ways to improve, without question, but the draft offers more so of a solution for the long term, and the team's trade pieces aren't exactly the most enthralling for other teams to give up valuable assets for either. For me, whether it's fair or not, a lot of the pressure for the future of this team's success is on the shoulders of Anthony Edwards here. How good the Wolves will be moving forward will ultimately come down to how good of a player he actually becomes. What's promising is that over the last month or so, he's really started to look comfortable out on the court and has been playing some fantastic basketball, but at the same time, consistency and efficiency with his production could still definitely use some work. He was the number 1 pick in this year's draft, and he clearly has star potential with his ability to heat up and score points in bunches from all 3 levels and use his explosive athleticism to overwhelm defenders. But as is the case with most of the Wolves' core, his defense needs work, and the Wolves' ranking as the 4th worst defensive team in the league this year, that's where they need the most help. The offensive firepower of Karl Towns, D'Angelo Russell, Malik Beasley, and Anthony Edwards could potentially be good enough to be a playoff team, but none of those guys have ever been great defenders by any means at any point in their careers, and especially in this era, good defenses can take you a long way. I hope they prove me wrong, but time is ticking, and if the core right now isn't enough to get them over the playoff hump, then they may be forced to make some drastic changes, and it's already being rumored that hitting the restart button isn't completely off the table according to the front office. Doing that would be completely admitting defeat on how they handled Karl-Anthony Towns and these last few years, and that would mean many more years at the bottom. I hope I'm wrong about this, because guys like Towns, D'Lo, and Edwards are all so fun to watch at their best, but it's just not looking very good for them at the moment. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think the Timberwolves need to do to turn things around. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.